Okay, welcome back, Anatomy. Today we're going to talk about cells of the nervous system. In my class, we have a quiz tomorrow, and it's covering both neurons and neuroglia. So these were two separate lectures in class, but we're combining them into one for the purpose of studying for our quiz. So just reviewing, we have neurons and we have neuroglia. The neurons are the ones that you typically think of as a nerve cell. So this is a typical neuron. And we need to be able to label a neuron like this. We need to be able to classify it according to its structure and its function. So first of all, let's talk about the fact that a neuron cannot reproduce. So any damage to a neuron is going to have a long-lasting effect because we can't make any more of them. And that's different from the other cell. The neuroglia can reproduce. The neurons can transmit impulses and neuroglia cannot. So there's two big differences between the two types of cells. So the neuron has three main parts. So the dendrite, the pieces out here that look like tree branches, dendra comes from the word tree. And here's the soma, which is the cell body, not the green in the middle, that's the nucleus. And then we have this long extension here called the axon. So the cell body is what you would think of as a typical cell. It contains cytoplasm, mitochondria, a nucleus, the other organelles that all cells would have. It needs to make proteins, it needs to make energy, all of those things. Out here, the dendrites, for sensory cells, those that say are in your skin, we're going to call these dendrites receptors. So that's where we're actually going to receive information. The job of the dendrites is to take information to the cell body. Now the axon, its job is to take information away from the cell body. So maybe it is going to another cell to send impulses to neurons, or maybe it's going to an effector cell like your muscle or a gland or an organ and telling another part of your body what to do. So it might be transmitting signals to another signal transmitting cell, or it's sending signals to a cell telling it what to do. All right, so here's some other features that you could identify in a typical neuron. One is it has the axon terminal here on the end. That's where we're going to release our chemical messengers. Our chemical messengers are called neurotransmitters. We have lots of different neurotransmitters, each for different purposes. So information is going to be sent out of these axon terminals and received from another receptor on another cell. So we talked about acetylcholine in muscle cells in the last chapter. That would be a good example. Here, this coating that you see on the outside of the cell, that's called a myelin sheath. So myelin we find on many axons, and that insulates the axon and it protects it from damage because remember, we can't replace it. If it's gone, it's gone. And so that's going to help speed up signal transmission as well. The other thing, in between each of these cells making up the myelin sheath, there is an exposed axon, and that exposed axon will be called the node of Ranvier. So the node of Ranvier is the space in between the Schwann cells in this case that allows for impulses to travel. So the important things about the myelin sheath here is that it creates a faster transmission. So this transmission is called saltatory conduction. Saltare means to hop. So what I see here is a depolarization only happening at the axon. If you remember, in order for depolarization to occur, ions have to cross the membrane. So sodium's going to rush in, potassium's going to rush out. If I have another cell wrapped around that axon, it can't happen there. So we can only have depolarization where the axon is exposed. So it's going to jump over that insulation, and that allows it to go very quickly. So over here, this cell has saltatory conduction on top, and the one on the bottom has constant conduction. So every single nanometer along that axon has to depolarize. So that's going to make that a much slower transmission. Okay, so we know the basic pieces and parts of a neuron. Now we want to be able to classify neurons. So we classify them either according to function, which refers to the direction the impulse is traveling with respect to the central nervous system, or we classify them according to their structure, which is referring to how many extensions are connected to the body. So here I see this arrow is showing me the direction the impulse is traveling. So this is going towards the CNS, and this one is through the CNS, and this is coming out the CNS. So going toward the CNS we'll call the sensory, going through is inter, and going out is motor. And I have a separate slide on each of those. And over here you see this is the cell body. It has two extensions, so I'm going to call that one bipolar. This one only has one extension connected to it, so I'll call it unipolar. This one has several. Look at all those dendrites around the body, and we'll call that one multipolar. So down here, this is the typical neuron that you see. It's the most common. So whenever you have to diagram a neuron, you're looking at a motor neuron that's multipolar. So this is the structure of both interneurons and motor neurons. Bipolar, up here, you see there's two extensions connected to the cell body. So one going in and one going out. So one dendrite, one axon. Bipolar are found in your special senses, like your eyes and your nose, and your mouth and your tongue. And so the dendrite, remember, is called a receptor. The unipolar down here, so you see there's only one extension connected to that, and then it branches into proximal and distal extensions. So we find those in our general senses. So what's the difference between a general sense and a special sense? Sorry. General senses are found all over your body. So your sense of touch is a general sense. Proprioception, which has to do with tension in your muscles, the tendons in your muscles sense when there's a difference in tension, and you have a tendency to like counteract it. So senses that are found all throughout your body are called general senses. So those in our skin that maybe we feel the pinprick in, the common example, that would be a unipolar neuron, whereas those that are found in specific areas, so I only have rods and cones in my eyes, I don't have them anywhere else, those are called special senses, and those are going to be bipolar. So functionally, we classify them according to the direction the impulse is traveling with respect to the CNS. So now that we just talked about a unipolar neuron, we can look at a unipolar in action. So here is some skin, here is some receptors. Those receptors are picking up some signal. Maybe you touched something that was hot or cold, or maybe it was sharp or smooth or rough. So you have these sense receptors here. Those are the dendrites of a sensory neuron. So that sensory neuron then is an afferent neuron, meaning the impulse is going toward the CNS. So with the sensory neuron, the dendrites and the cell body are both outside in the peripheral nervous system. But over here, I'm looking at the spinal cord. So here you have a ganglion, and that's where you find a cluster of cell bodies. And those then are outside of the CNS, but the axons extend into the CNS. Connected to those are associative nerves. Here's an associative nerve. Its branches aren't very long, but it does have many extensions. So we know that's a multipolar neuron. So that's entirely within the CNS. So this would be entirely within my spinal cord or my brain. And what it's doing is simply connecting a motor nerve to, this would be my motor nerve, to a sensory nerve. So the sensory nerve picks up information from your external or your internal stimuli, takes it to the CNS, hangs out in the spinal cord, comes back out, or it goes up to the brain and decides what to do, and then it comes back down, and then it sends its signal off through the motor nerve. The motor neuron, a multipolar neuron. So here I see the motor neuron is connected to, hopefully you recognize that, as muscle. So you see the fascicles all in bundles that make up the muscle. So this is efferent. It's sending signals away from the spinal cord, the brain and spinal cord. Over here again, sensory cell taking information in, and then it's handed off to the efferent neuron or the motor neuron, which takes it out to a gland, an organ, or a muscle. So this is just repeating that. This is how cells are communicating. So you see the sensory associative motor. I like to spell the name SAM because it helps me remember that. Or you can think afferent in, inter, in between, and motor going out, or efferent going out. So those are the neurons, the ones that can actually send signals but can't reproduce. Now we're going to talk about the neuroglia, the ones that can't send signals but they can reproduce. So neuroglia means nerve glue, and sometimes you just see it called glial cells. And that's fine. So together they support, they insulate, they protect neurons. Because remember, once the neurons are gone, they're gone. So we need to protect them as best we can. So there are 6 of them. 4 are found in the CNS, 2 are in the PNS. So pay attention to which is which. So this is an astrocyte. I don't know if you can tell how big that is, but think all these other little cells you can hardly see, right? So an astrocyte is very large. It's the most numerous of your neuroglia, so those sound like good test questions. It's also star-shaped, which is where it gets its name. Astro refers to the star. So what it does, it anchors neurons to their blood supply. It anchors them to capillaries. And so it can do a little bit of filtering perhaps. It supports the blood-brain barrier, and that has to do with some epithelial cells within the nervous system. It also controls chemical environment by picking up released neurotransmitters. We want to recycle them so we can keep using them. And excess ions. We don't want depolarization happening just any old time. We want it kind of coordinated and in specific moments. So often, not so often hopefully, we have some injury to our brain, and astrocytes kind of make up the scar. So if you think of the scar on your skin is built up cells, you have some built up cells in an injured area, so it fills the gap, fills the space, and those are the astrocytes. Microglia, hopefully you recognize the prefix micro means small. They're small phagocytic cells. So phagocytic means that they engulf and eat foreign things. So your white blood cells are phagocytic cells. And microglia serve the same function as white blood cells do in your central nervous system. So they're considered the primary immune defense, and then they're going to gobble up bacteria and other things that don't belong, debris, dead cells. Once your brain cells are gone, we said they don't reproduce, so we need to get rid of them. Ependymal cells, so these are modified, perhaps, epithelial cells. They have cilia, and they line the brain and the spinal cord. So here you have an open space. So you have some ventricles in your brain that have open spaces. When you look at the spinal cord, there's some open space in there as well. So cerebral spinal fluid is in those spaces, and cerebral spinal fluid has antibodies in it, so it protects us from infections. It also has nutrients, so that kind of keeps the health of all the cells, basically. The cilia, they work to brush that cerebral spinal fluid, so it keeps it circulating, kind of keeps it fresh. So that's the purpose of the ependymal cells. So this is the last one that's found in the central nervous system. All the ones I've talked about so far are CNS. So astrocytes, microglia, ependymal cells, and oligodendrocytes are all found in the CNS. And sometimes any of these words, they might drop the site and put glial on the end. So it's an oligodendrocyte as in singular, or collectively oligodendroglia. That's hard to say. So what I see, these blue cells, these are the oligodendrocytes. The yellow one is your neuron. So what it's doing, it has these long extensions that wrap around and around and around and around and around and around the axons to protect them so that we can keep sending signals and not have any mechanical damage perhaps to those axons. Again, we talked about saltatory conduction, so it allows for the quick impulse. It insulates the cell as well. 2 cells left. So oligodendrocyte is in the CNS. Schwann cell, similar cell in the PNS. So down here you see the oligodendrocyte. Notice its whole body is outside of the cell. Here you have the Schwann cell. Theodore Schwann we learned about in 9th grade with the cell theory. So this cell wraps itself around and around and around and around the axon, just like these extensions did. So the oligodendrocyte does in the CNS what the Schwann cell does in the PNS. It creates, see here, we see it going around and around and around and around. So it creates the protective coating of the axon, and helps to speed up neural transmission. Finally, we have the satellite cell. Satellites go around and around bodies, right? So this satellite is going around and around the cell bodies of those neurons that are in the PNS. So they're more likely to get hurt out and about, right? Outside of our brain and spinal cord, we have a lot more. I bump into things all the time. So we want to protect these as much as possible. So they're going to put a protective coating on the outside of the cell body so that it can be as safe as possible, let's say. Sometimes these do become injured and then they start to send lots of signals related to pain. So they're associated with chronic pain and nobody wants that. So that's it. We got the neurons. We classified them functionally and structurally. We have the neuron pieces and parts. So we need to be able to diagram a neuron. And then we talked about neuroglia. So first we should know two differences, reproduction and transmission, between neurons and neuroglia. We should know 4 neuroglia that are found in the CNS, and 2, they both start with an S, so that makes it easy. 2 that are found in the PNS. So for all 6 of those, you need to know their characteristics by description. You need to know the function of each. So I think you can do it. So I hope that's helpful. Good luck on your quiz.